Okay, I am back. Thank you again to everyone who has joined us today for Feet, Forks, and the Fate of Our Families with Dr. David Katz. I will go ahead and hand the presentation over to Dr. Katz and just want to give everyone a note on questions. If you want to hold them until the end, we will answer questions once we finish the presentation. So if you can just wait on the questions until the end, we will be able to circle back with you then. And now I will let David Katz begin his presentation.
The challenge before us all is to figure out what it will take to make that medicine go down. That's where we've fallen down. So here's where I'd like to spend the next little while together. These are the miles we have to traverse to realize the full promise of the knowledge already at our disposal. We've got to get out of the woods, look at what's been lost in translation, better understand the true promise of public health by looking at its private parts, recognize the problem that has forestalled progress for decades, talk about the leverage we get when we use the right metaphors like levers and levees, see if we can move health from the road less traveled to a path of lesser resistance, and conclude by seeing the forest through the trees. But we begin in a dark wood, and what's dark about it really is the shape of modern epidemiology. We're obviously all familiar with the burden of chronic disease. We hear about heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes all the time, and for the most part, we've been touched by them personally. Our families have been affected by them. So we tend to think about the leading causes of premature death in our culture as these diseases, these perils. But in fact, that's a superficial view of what's really going on, because diseases ultimately are not causes. Diseases are effects, and the valuable question is, what's causing them? What causes the diseases that take both years from life and life from years? Well, the first and perhaps best answer to this question was delivered in 1993. A paper published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, Actual Causes of Death in the United States. McGinnis and Figi identified 10 factors which overwhelmingly each of us has the capacity to control in our daily lives that explain all of premature deaths that occur in our country every year. And of that list of 10, we'll focus for the next little while just on the first 3, because almost all of the action was there. Tobacco, dietary pattern, and physical activity accounted for fully 80% of the toll. So 80% of all chronic disease, 80% of all premature death would go away if we made better use of our feet, our forks, and our fingers. Now, this was the message back in 1993. That's an old vintage. You may like your data fresher. We have them. 10 years later, same issue was reanalyzed by scientists at the CDC. They reached the same conclusion. All that had really changed over the span of a decade is that the gap between tobacco as the #1 cause of premature death and the combination of bad use of feet and forks as #2 had narrowed. Narrowed partly due to strides we've made against tobacco, but also because of deteriorating use of feet and forks, worsening dietary patterns, less physical activity, more obesity, and diabetes. This was the landscape in 2000. Even that's getting to be an old vintage. I bet you like your data fresher. In 2009, then, Earl Ford and colleagues, again at the CDC, published results of survey research conducted among 23,000 adults in and around Potsdam, Germany. They asked these people about 4 factors. They asked them, do you smoke, yes or no? Do you eat well, yes or no? Habitual intake of fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. Are you physically active on a regular basis, yes or no? And is your weight under good control, yes or no? They compared the 2 ends of the spectrum. And the people who had 4 good answers, I don't smoke, I eat well, I'm active, my weight is well controlled, had an 80% lesser likelihood over the span of their lives of developing any major chronic disease, heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, dementia, etc., than those who had 4 bad answers. Flip the switch from bad to good on any one of these behaviors, and the likelihood of any chronic disease over the span of a lifetime goes down 50%, but fire on all 4 cylinders. Don't smoke, eat well, be active, control your weight. There is an 80% reduction in the lifetime probability of any chronic disease. If you happen not to like Potsdam for some reason or prefer your data fresher still, we have them. These same findings were replicated yet again about 2 years ago in a cohort study in the UK, and just about a year ago in yet another cohort study here in the U.S. In essence, a repetitive drumbeat in the peer-reviewed literature spanning 20 years, telling us over and over again of the power of lifestyle over nothing less than our medical destinies. And the influence of lifestyle doesn't stop at the surface. It reverberates to our very pith and marrow, to within the double helix of DNA itself. We often fret about the nature-nurture debate, wondering where the greater power center resides. Is it the genetic hand we're dealt, or is it how we play that hand? The reality is we can nurture nature. In this study by my friend Dean Ornish and colleagues, they enrolled 30 men with early-stage prostate cancer in a lifestyle program. Comprehensive program involving an optimal plant-based diet, regular physical activity, obviously no tobacco, good sleep, stress reduction, all that good stuff. Over a span of months, they measured the effects of the lifestyle program on gene expression. 500 cancer promoter genes were dramatically downregulated in their expression. 50 cancer suppressor genes were dramatically upregulated in their expression. The power of lifestyle as medicine is such that it can refashion our medical destinies at the very level of our genes. And this is a literature that's filling up with replication fast. So I think the case can be made, and indeed dare hope the case has been made, that the master levers of medical destiny are nothing we learn to wield in the corridors of hospitals, nothing at the cutting edge of biomedical advance, but quite simply feet, forks, and fingers. And you know what Archimedes told us about a lever? Give me one long enough and I can move the whole world. Well, make no mistake, these levers are long enough and should long since have served to move the whole world of public health and epidemiology to a better place. But, alas, we like to say knowledge is power. Would that it were so. The gap between what we know and what we do with what we know belies that wishful thinking. Knowledge is necessary for power. It's prerequisite to power, but it's clearly not commensurate with power. There is a translational gap that separates the two, and an awful lot has been lost in that translation. We have failed for decades to turn what we know about the power of lifestyle into action, and that's where the potential to improve the human condition resides. Knowledge is not power until you use it, and the results of our failure are quite staggering. Many ways to capture that, but one of the best is these maps showing obesity trends. CDC provides these. Some of you may have seen them. We begin back in 1985, and as the map changes color, prevalence of obesity is rising. This is 1995. This is 2000, 2002, 2004, 2006, 2008, and just before you decide to pack up the family and move to Colorado, if you don't live there already, here's 2010. So these are pretty dreadful trends, and they show no sign of abating. In fact, as we look ahead, projections show worsening of the situation. CDC is suggesting that should current trends persist by 2030, 42% of American adults will be obese. Right now, 65 to 80% are overweight or obese, but only about a third are actually obese. So this will worsen to the tune of $500 billion should current trends persist. In fact, some researchers suggest that should current trends persist by the middle of this century, virtually every adult in the United States will be either overweight or obese. Only a rounding error will be missing out. And then if we look at trends in diabetes shown here, obviously they mirror the trends in obesity, and that's predictable since obesity really is the canary in the coal mine of chronic disease. And here the CDC projects, again, should current trends persist, by the middle of this century, 1 in 3 Americans will have diabetes. Now, that's really quite a shocking figure. There are about 27 million diabetics in the U.S. now. We're having trouble dealing with that. We're having trouble paying the bills. 1 in 3 means well over 100 million. It's almost unimaginable that we could be solvent as a country when 1 in 3 of us has a severe, potentially disabling, usually costly, serious chronic disease beginning at every younger age. If current trends persist, nothing less than the fate of the nation really hangs in the balance. But this lies around the next corner, and we've had disparate looks at the future. The F is in Fat report that Trust for America's Health puts out this year takes us down 2 different paths. One toward a future where current trends persist, and that really is very bleak. and the other where knowledge becomes power, where we take what we've known for these past decades, turn it into what we routinely do through programs, in communities, for families, and we turn the tide. And this bad stuff mostly goes away. And of course, it's not just bad stuff affecting us, it's bad stuff engulfing our kids. Kids are succumbing en masse to what used to be adult onset diabetes. We now call it type 2. It's actually a more severe disease in children than it is in their parents. Kids are developing ever more cardiac risk factors. I've seen coronary bypass in kids as young as 17, but although I've been something of a prophet of doom on this topic for the past couple of decades, even I did not foresee a 35% increase in the rate of stroke among 5 to 14-year-olds. That's just what we've seen in the United States with epidemic childhood obesity, something that better use of feet and forks could fix, the only smoking gun on the scene. So this is where we find ourselves. Pretty grim, and I apologize if that was a bit depressing, but you know what they say, it's always darkest just before the dawn. So let's welcome the dawn. Let's look for a silver lining in these dark clouds, and indeed there is one. And it's every bit as luminous as the clouds are dark. In fact, I could say to you, if we have had enough of this, if we decide to turn what we know into what we do, if knowledge were power, we could eliminate at least 80% of all heart disease, make it go away, 90% of all diabetes, as much as 60% of all cancer. I could say this to you, and I could cite peer-reviewed papers to back me up. In fact, I am saying this to you, and I am citing peer-reviewed papers to back me up. And I suspect in doing so, I'm failing to bring a tear to any eye on the webinar or a lump to any throat. And that's unfortunate because these are stunning statistics, arguably among the most stunning in the history of public health. But at the end of the day, they are statistics. They're dull, they're dry, they're bland, and they are anonymous. Although I work in public health, I've long felt public health is encumbered by a crippling fiction, for of course there is no public. The public is nameless, the public is faceless, and the public is impossible to love. There is no public. There's just you and me and everybody else. So what about the private parts of public health? Well, consider whether someone you love has been affected by heart disease, and if so, bring their face to your mind's eye. Consider whether someone you love has been affected by cancer, and if so, bring their face to your mind's eye. And consider whether someone you love has been affected by stroke or diabetes. And now as all of us do this and we remember the day or the days we got the news, made the trip to the hospital, and what an awful day that was, whether they got better or they didn't get better, when we first heard about it, it was terrible. Now imagine 8 times in 10, that bad day simply didn't happen. To us, when we talk about an 80% reduction in the burden of chronic disease, it may seem remote, about some vaguely defined public. It's not. It's about you and me. If these 4 chronic diseases have invaded your family as they have mine, an 80% reduction in their prevalence means better life for you and me and the people we love. It means those bad days don't happen. And as we look ahead to the future we bequeath our children, it can either be one where those terrible days happen more often than they ever did for us at every younger age, or it can be a future in which 8 times in 10 we spare our children that burden because those bad days don't happen at all. That's what it means. When we part the veil of statistical anonymity, there is no public. The faces we see looking back are the faces of people we know and the faces of people we love. It is for them the miles of translation must be traversed. It is for them that the promise of lifestyle to the human condition must be kept. Why hasn't it been kept yet? What's in the way? Obviously something monumental must be present to have forestalled progress for so long, and indeed I think that's the case. In essence, if you take this and you add this, you get this, inevitably, in much the same way as if you took this and added this and got this. And I give you my figurative trademark for the better part of 20 years, the polar bear in the Sahara. And what the slide is meant to convey, it has nothing to do with global warming and the fact that this may actually happen to polar bears, alas, but simply that creatures are adapted to a particular environment. Polar bears are adapted to a cold environment. Everything that allows them to flourish in the cold would conspire against them in the heat. And we are creatures too, although we sometimes forget it. And throughout most of human history, calories were relatively scarce and hard to get. Physical activity was unavoidable. It was called survival, and everybody did it every day. And we've devised a modern world in which physical activity is scarce and hard to get, and calories are unavoidable. We have no native adaptations to deal with that. We are polar bears in the Sahara. No native defenses against caloric excess or the lure of the couch, never having needed them before. But we certainly need them now. Fortunately, we do have one native defense to call on, and that's great big Homo sapien brains. Arguably, we're smarter than the average bear, and maybe we can think our way out of this mess of our own devising. And people are trying. The government has thought hard about this and has decided that plates have more to do with meals than pyramids. This is a singular advance. It may solve the problem of epidemic obesity, but best not to count on that. So others are working the problem too, like Michael Pollan, who gives us this pithy and sagacious advice: eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Excellent advice, I endorse it, but it can be hard to swallow, and the typical American family just isn't doing it. This is from the book Hungry Planet, What the World Eats. It's a picture of a family and their groceries for a week, and this represents the good old US of A. So you look at this image, you know, there are grapes and tomatoes back there, but just about everything else is in a bag, box, bottle, jar, can, and a fair amount of the stuff looks like it would glow in the dark given the opportunity. So there's just no way these people are following Pollan's good advice. And when we look epidemiologically, 1.5% of Americans meet daily recommendations for both fruits and vegetables. 1.5%. It's been stuck there for decades, this despite the fact that orange juice qualifies as a fruit, and both French fries and the ketchup poured over them qualify independently as vegetables. Totally pitiful. So it's not for want of knowing where there is. We are not clueless about the basic care and feeding of Homo sapiens. We really do know what a healthy diet is. Trouble is getting there from here. It feels to most people like you just can't get there from here. I think you can. And I think to do it, we need to switch our metaphors. We began with the master levers of medical destiny. Let's talk about a levee. I like the levee metaphor, first of all, because what we confront collectively may be likened to a flood. Essentially everything about modern living that makes it modern is obesogenic and to some extent morbidogenic, meaning it causes obesity and disease. There is a flood of highly processed, hyper-palatable, energy-dense, nutrient-dilute, glow-in-the-dark, bet you can't eat just one kind of foods. There is a constant flow of marketing dollars encouraging us and our children to overeat the very foods that propel us toward obesity and chronic disease. There's wave after wave of technological advance giving us gadgets and gizmos that do all the things muscles used to do at work and at play, reducing our energy expenditure. A vast obesogenic flood. If we want to contain it and turn the tide, we need a levee. That's reason one I like the levee metaphor. Reason two is that I'm supposedly an obesity expert. I've been working in this space for 20 years, and the whole time I've been at it, the problem's been getting worse, not better. Now that's tempting to say, okay, I must suck at what I do, and it should have long since run up the white flag. But the alternative view is you don't turn the tide with a levee until the height of the levee tops the height of the floodwater, and we're just not there yet. So it's actually a recognition that we can get there incrementally, one sandbag at a time, but it's a long, cumulative process. So I remind myself of that and say on any given day, I will never be the whole solution, but I'd much rather be part of the solution than part of the problem. And abdication makes you part of the problem. So I'll keep stacking sandbags till my back gives out. And the third reason I like the levee is it reminds us that sometimes you need the whole thing. We are a quick fix, silver bullet, active ingredient kind of society, but as we wrestle with the problem of obesity and chronic disease, that's a bit like thinking I'll put down one sandbag and ask, are we dry yet? And the answer, of course, will be no. No one program, no one thing will solve this entire problem because the problem runs through our entire culture. If we then say, well, that program didn't do the entire job all by itself, it must be a bad program, let's discard it and try another one and ask, are we dry yet? The answer will again be no. This would seem silly, except it's actually rooted in science. My colleagues and I have conducted meta-analyses of the obesity prevention and control literature, and we've reached exactly this conclusion. We see people wresting failure from the jaws of success because they overreach. They try to solve the entire problem with one program. Obesity and chronic disease lie at the end of a causal pathway, which may be likened to a floodplain. And if you put one program in this causal pathway to interrupt it, it's like tossing one sandbag onto that floodplain. The flow will simply divert around it. You won't change a thing. If you want to stop the flow, you want to interrupt it completely, you need the whole levee. And I like the levee metaphor because it reminds us that we have to aggregate good programming into a comprehensive whole. I thought for a while I was the only one saying this, but it turns out the Institute of Medicine is saying it as well. Pretty much their conclusion in their most recent report on what it will take to solve the weight of the nation problem. Basically, everything's broken. It all needs to be fixed. In other words, build a levee. We have some evidence that when we focus our attention on this issue and think that way, it makes a difference. We have some evidence that rates of obesity are leveling off in children and adults, and that's encouraging. On the other hand, we have recent evidence that the rates of more severe obesity are, as USA Today put it, skyrocketing. And so the problem continues to worsen, but it may no longer be useful to ask the question, how many of us are overweight or obese, because everybody who's vulnerable is already there, or nearly so. What we may have to start asking now is, how overweight or obese are the many of us, because we're moving within those categories to more severe degrees of obesity that further compromise years in life and life in years. The solution is a levee. So let's spend a few minutes now talking about sandbags in that levee, because that moves us from metaphor to something we can actually get our hands on, something that's actionable. And at this stage in my career, I am a sandbagger. This is what I do. I do my best to manufacture, stack, test, disseminate programs that can be part of a comprehensive anti-obesity, anti-chronic disease levee. I aspire to nothing else for the remainder of my career than helping to raise this levee. So a sandbagger I am. Here are some examples. We learned just a few weeks back that as little as 20 minutes of physical activity 5 days a week can be the difference between an at-risk child getting diabetes or avoiding it. I mean, that's just incredible. 20 minutes out of 1,440 minutes in a day is 1.39% of the minutes in a day. 20 minutes 5 times out of the minutes in a week is 0.99% of the minutes in a week. By investing less than 1% of a child's minutes, we can dodge the bullet of adult-onset diabetes in childhood. Well, you know, that's a gauntlet that we have to meet. And the problem has been we're recognizing this and at the same time actually jettisoning phys ed and recess from the school day because we don't have time. I've been going into schools for years and hearing about No Child Left Behind. We don't have time for phys ed and recess. So No Child Left Behind has been leaving all the children on their behinds, and that was unacceptable. So eventually, with the inspiration of my son, and for the sake of time I'll spare you the anecdote, we developed a program called ABC for Fitness, Activity Burst in the Classroom, which doles out brief bursts of physical activity as short as 3 minutes throughout the day whenever the kids are unteachable and need a break, which every parent on the webinar knows happens routinely. But you can accumulate the 30 minutes of physical activity over the course of the day right in the classroom. This program is freely available. Sounds good. Does it work? It does. We've tested it in 1,000 kids, controlled intervention trial. Those who got ABC for Fitness had significant improvements in key measures of fitness, stable performance on standardized tests, decreased behavioral problems and disruption in the classroom, significant decrease in use of all medication, significant decrease in use of medication for asthma, and a 33% reduction in medication use for ADHD, because the best remedy for rambunctiousness in children is recess, not Ritalin. ABC for Fitness is a sandbag in the levee. We also know that in general, physical activity preserves or enhances academic performance. Sound mind, sound body should sound familiar. It's the kind of sensible advice our grandparents gave us. Somewhere along the line we forgot about it, but modern science is leading us back there. We have a sandbag for the parents of those kids and for the teachers called ABE for Fitness, Activity Burst Everywhere. This is an online program available for free via any computer or smartphone where you can create a playlist of videos that will guide you through bursts of activity you can do in the office throughout the day, some of them even while seated at a desk. So help yourself to ABE for Fitness. 6 5-minute activity bursts will enhance your productivity, improve your health. There's your 30 minutes of physical activity. You didn't need to break a sweat, change your clothes, leave the office. If you can do more, great, but this can establish a floor. It's free. We have a food label literacy program called Nutrition Detectives. It's a DVD available in English and Spanish. It teaches kids and their parents how to identify and choose more nutritious foods and why they should care. And here, too, we've done a controlled intervention study, 1,200 families. Those who got the Nutrition Detectives program were significantly better able to identify more nutritious food. We expected that in the kids. What was interesting is we saw a significant improvement in the ability to identify more nutritious foods among the parents of the kids who got the program, and we never talked to the parents. The mission of this program is so streamlined. It basically all distills down to 5 clues that fit on a refrigerator magnet, an example of which is the shorter the ingredient list, the better, that the kids were able to take the information home and infect their parents with their knowledge, acting as good little vectors. This program is available for free. It's a sandbag in the levee. Middle schoolers are tougher to reach. We have a new program called Unjunk Yourself, and I invite you all to Google Unjunk Yourself and watch it on YouTube, the first of our videos. This will be a library of music videos reaching out to tweens and teens to get them stirred up about their health, tell them what's going on, help empower them, leading them to online tools they can use to take control of their health and their food choices in particular. We also need to think about changing food demand if we want to change food supply. Kids were somewhat resistant to improvements in school food because they never had a seat at the table when the changes were being discussed. I think in general we want inclusive approaches. I'll leave it there, but we're doing some work in this area, and this potentially can help raise the levee as well. I think the levee can grow faster when we start thinking interinstitutionally. It's amazing how often we talk about health promotion in adults or health promotion in kids as if we're living in parallel universes, as opposed to all living together in families. Basic functional unit of our society is the family, and we ignore this routinely, and I think at our peril. Work sites are routinely investing in health promotion because they can't afford to do otherwise. Here you see an $1,800 office chair. Very few workplaces can afford this. Starbucks cannot afford to keep spending more on disease care than coffee beans. So to fix this, they're investing in worksite wellness. But how about we take that up a notch? The children of the employees at any given worksite are their financial dependents. They are more and more prone to adult onset diseases. They are a cost center in their own right, but in addition to that, they are an influence on their parents' behavior. If they want to eat well and be active, it's easier for their parents to do it, and if they don't, it's harder. So what about businesses applying wellness strategies in schools? What about businesses, chambers of commerce, and for that matter, insurance companies adopting schools and saying, we'll help you implement state-of-the-art wellness programming for the kids because that will help change culture, the level of the family. If the adults get it at the work site and the kids get it in school and everybody's reading the same scripture, my goodness, we're really talking about something now. We're talking about beginning to shift our culture for thinking about health a bit more like wealth, something we value, something we nurture. I think we can get there from here. We have a sandbag in the levee for clinicians called OUCH, Online Weight Management Counseling for Healthcare Professionals. It's a free CME program, continuing medical education credits for doctors, based on 15 years of research we've done in the area of behavior modification, available online for free. I'm going to skip a couple of these for the sake of time, and I will get to Nuvel, which I think is my greatest contribution to the levee, and I think really has the potential to exert a meaningful influence on the obesogenic flood tide. The story, very briefly, traces its origins back to 2003. I was privileged to be a member of a group of 15 academics invited to D.C. by the Secretary of Health at the time, Tommy Thompson, to meet with him, the Commissioner of the FDA, Mark McClellan, and others, the heads of the NIH and the CDC and the Surgeon General. And the 15 of us around a conference table were called on in turn by the Secretary of Health, who gave us each a 3-minute term and an opportunity to give him and the federal agencies one good idea they could use to combat the trends in obesity and diabetes. And my one good idea essentially was GPS for nutrition. Based on experience with my patients, based on experience with my wife, who is highly educated, very bright, and totally committed, but still finds food labels confusing, I said, look, it's just about impossible for even the highly above average shopper to say which bread is best for their family. most nutritious, which cereal, which pasta sauce, which salad dressing. It's shockingly hard. And I told the story about my wife, who, by the way, has a PhD in neuroscience from Princeton University, comes home from the supermarket with 4 loaves of bread and smoke coming out of her ear, saying, if you want to know the most nutritious of these, you figure out which one it is, because bread A has the most fiber but also the most sodium. Bread B has better sodium, but it's got added sugar way down the ingredient list. Bread C doesn't have the added sugar, and the fiber's not bad, and the sodium looks decent, and it says 0 grams trans fat on the front of the package, but it's the one that's got partially hydrogenated oil in the ingredient list, in parentheses, where it says may contain 1 or more of the following. I don't know if it does, but it could. And bread D says multigrain and has amber waves of grain on the packaging, but it's got the least fiber of all, and I can't tell if any of them is actually a whole grain. So basically I said, Mr. Secretary, if a PhD in neuroscience from Princeton is not enough to pick out a loaf of bread, I think you guys set the bar a little high. Convene a multidisciplinary panel of top-notch experts in nutrition and public health. Let them pool everything they know in the best available science. Turn it into a guidance system anybody can use at a glance so that everybody's a nutrition expert. And when the feds didn't do it, I turned to the administration of the hospital where my lab is located, asked if they would pay the bills, and I did it, along with some of the best in the business, the chair of nutrition at Harvard, Walter Willett, the inventor of the glycemic index, David Jenkins, president of the American Cancer Society, John Sefrin, past president of the American Diabetes Association, Fran Kaufman, and on it goes. A dream team came together, worked with me for 2 years. We built the overall nutritional quality index algorithm, which includes all of these nutrients. You'll have to memorize this fast because we don't have a lot of time. The algorithm is populated with nutrients, but it's from the diet eye perspective. And what we do is ask the question, how does the concentration of a nutrient in a food compare to the recommended concentration of that nutrient in the diet overall? So for example, in the case of sodium, the upper recommended intake of sodium is 2,400 milligrams in a 2,000 calorie diet. 2,400 per 2,000 is 1.2 milligrams of sodium per calorie. We could take the sodium in the food, divide that by the calories in the food, and divide that by 1.2, and it would answer the question, how many times more or less salty is this food than you want your diet to be on average? So every nutrient in the algorithm enters that way. We then adjust them mathematically in ways you don't want to hear about, and we weight every nutrient for its actual health effects based on severity, prevalence, and strength of association. We look at the severity of the condition with the nutrient is associated, we look at the prevalence of the condition in the population, and we look at how strongly the nutrient is associated with that condition. And then things get a little more complicated looking. We populate the algorithm with nutrient data derived from the ingredient list and nutrition facts panel, but we use more nutrients than show up there, so our dietitians impute the missing data by reverse engineering the recipe. The USDA does just the same to populate its database. And at the end of all of this, you get Nuval, the program that scores food 1 to 100. The higher the number, the more nutritious the food, GPS for nutrition. And the validation research we've done to date shows it works exactly as intended. Most important is this study out of Harvard. Nuval scores were assigned to the foods consumed by 100,000 people followed for 20 years. The higher the average Nuval scores of their diets, the lower their rate of cardiovascular disease, the lower the rate of diabetes, the lower their body mass index, and the lower their rate of premature death from any cause whatsoever. We actually can empower people to get to better diets and better health, one evidence-based, well-informed choice at a time. And the anecdotes we get from the field are even more compelling. Sally Galvin is a wife and mother of 2, shops in a supermarket in the Midwest that has Nuval, did not join a program, did not spend extra money, did not get bariatric surgery, but lost 115 pounds over 18 months. And if you look at her husband's face, you can see he lost weight too. The kids got healthier. All she did was trade up her groceries with the power of Nuval. It's in about 1,700 supermarkets in 32 states or thereabouts, coast to coast, reaching about 30 million people. Ideally, with the help of some of you on the phone, it'll reach more in new and even more empowering ways. I think we can trade up further by linking the power of financial incentives to nutritional quality. We really don't need to spend more for more nutritious food because there's money to be saved there as rates of chronic disease go down. But I'm going to skip this for the sake of time. We do have more sandbags on the assembly line at my nonprofit foundation and my lab. Ideally, when we do enough, all the right things in all the right places, we can take health from the obstacle course it's been on and put it on a path of lesser resistance. I think all that really stands in our way is failure to see the big picture, or if you will, the elephant in the room, the forest through the trees. But I think if we recognize the nature of our dilemma, this is a problem we can solve. Thank you all very much for your time and attention. I'm happy, Mary, to take questions now.
Hello. So we just have a couple questions queued up, and if you have anything, you still have time to send them over, so go ahead and use that chat function. But we'll go ahead and take some of the ones from the queue. So Dr. Katz, our first question is, what about organic versus non-organic food? Which is better?
Well, it's an interesting question, Mary. I think organic is better, but I guess it depends what we mean by better. Organic is generally recognized as better for the planet. And I think it stands to reason that it's better for us not to have pesticide residue and antibiotics and such in our food that we really don't want to be consuming. But if we ask the question vis-a-vis Nuval, is an organic food more nutritious, then the answer is no, not necessarily. Because after all, you can have conventionally grown broccoli. So broccoli that's not organic, or spinach that's not organic, those are still highly nutritious foods. Might be nice if they were organic, they might be even better, but they're really superfoods even so. And you can have candy and gummy bears that are organic, but frankly, organic sugar is still sugar. So you have to think about nutritious, good for health, and organic as two separate things that can overlap. I think it's ideal when they do overlap. So nutritious foods that are also organic, good for us, good for the planet, good to our fellow creatures. I think that's all good. We were very interested in incorporating organic directly into the Anki algorithm. We're looking again at it for Anki 2.0, the update to the algorithm. But frankly, the science to indicate that organic means more nutritious or that it translates into better health outcomes really isn't there. To date, it hasn't been there. We're philosophically very much in favor of it, but I think it's important to note that the Anki algorithm in Nuval is science-driven. It's evidence-based. So when our philosophical yearnings are not strongly supported by science, we don't indulge them. So organic is better, but it doesn't necessarily mean more nutritious.
Thank you. That is good information. And our next question is, I try to eat right and exercise. It is hard to keep away from comfort foods such as chips and sweets. What is the best way to avoid overeating on these?
Actually, it's a great question, and I think the best way to avoid overeating them is to trade up. One of the many virtues of more nutritious food, and Sally Galvin's example is one of many we've heard about, of people losing a ton of weight just by trading up. When people do that, they're not giving up chips or giving up cookies or, giving up pasta. They're buying better chips and better cookies and better pasta sauce. There are pasta sauces on every supermarket shelf in this country that are more concentrated in added sugar than ice cream topping. There are breakfast cereals that are more concentrated in added salt than potato chips or pretzels. This is stuff most people don't know. This is stuff from the things you never knew files. And, there's no way to defend yourself against stuff you never knew. But there's a reason why there's salt in food that isn't salty and sugar in food that isn't sweet. Putting it in there stimulates our appetite center. It makes us eat more. Everybody remembers when the food industry told us, bet you can't eat just one. Well, folks, they weren't kidding around. They knew what they were doing, and they've been doing everything in their power to maximize the number of calories it takes for us to feel full. When you crave chips and can't stop eating them, there is a PhD in nutritional biochemistry and a neurophysiologist with a functional MRI machine behind it. So the way you fight back is with a system that empowers you to trade up your choices. If you eat better chips, actually you'll fill up on fewer of them. You'll get more fiber, less salt, no added sugar. If you eat better pasta sauce, it won't have added sugar. You'll fill up faster. If you trade up your pasta to whole grain pasta, it'll fill you up faster. So I actually think that the single best way to control portion is to improve quality. And as you improve the quality of foods, you'll be taking calories, sugar, salt out of your diet. You'll be rehabilitating your taste buds so they become more sensitive to sugar and salt. You'll prefer ever more wholesome foods. And one of the things that will just naturally happen during that process is you will start to fill up on fewer calories. I mean, you think about the most wholesome foods. Whoever overeats apples, right? Whoever overeats Brussels sprouts, right? I mean, you think about the best foods we know, they fill us up. Well, you don't have to go quite that far. You can go to the middle. Eat better chips. Eat better pasta sauce. So that's my recommendation. This is something I practice myself, and I've done with patients for 20 years, and it works beautifully.
Thank you. And, you know, we have a number of kind of related questions I just wanted to address quickly about our Nuval app as well. That is coming out in November. We've had a lot of questions about whether or not that app is available for mobile phones. And that will be coming out in November, so watch for more information in My Active Health about the Nuval app. And one very specific question I wanted to also answer is Nuval is available in Kroger. We are coming to the end of our scheduled time, so we'll throw one more question out and then we will wrap it up. And this will be available in a recorded session with the transcript and questions we couldn't get to in My Active Health. So if we don't get to your question today, or you know, if you had to drop off at some point, you will be able to access this recording and the transcript in My Active Health. So we'll get to that final question. Are there any diet supplements that you recommend as part of a healthier lifestyle?
For general health, Mary, there are. Most of us are prone to vitamin D deficiency. I routinely find when I test my patients they're low in vitamin D. I recommend a vitamin D supplement routinely. We don't get enough sunlight is the problem. I recommend omega-3 supplements routinely, fish oil, krill oil, flaxseed oil, algae-based oils. One of those options because our diets tend to be too low in omega-3. I wind up recommending probiotics for most of my patients because many factors of modern living, from antibiotic exposure to processed food, can disrupt our intestinal flora, and things like irritable bowel syndrome are often improved with probiotics. After that, it tends to be on a case-by-case basis. If the question is specifically about weight, there are very few supplements that have a meaningful effect on weight. One that I think does look very promising is called PGX, and folks can look that up. It's a modified dietary fiber where you eat just a few grams, but it has the metabolic influence of eating many more grams. It tends to fill you up. It actually improves blood glucose and blood insulin. So I think that's an interesting product, and I think we'll be hearing more about that. But overwhelmingly, the best medicine for both controlling weight and improving health is lifestyle. Supplements are just that. They're supplements. They're not a substitute. So it really does ultimately come down to feet, forks, and fingers. Now, fingers, ideally, all of us are avoiding tobacco, but better daily use of feet and forks can add years to life and life to years, and the challenge is getting there from here. But I think with the right tools, tools that put physical activity into every day, and tools that make better nutrition more accessible, like Nuval, that make it easy to identify it and choose it, again, I think we can use lifestyle as medicine, and then supplements may add a little bit of something, but most of the action is the lifestyle.
Thank you. That was a great presentation. I know I learned a lot, Dr. Katz. We really appreciate you taking the time to go through this presentation with us today, and I'd like to thank everyone who joined us on the line. And again, I know I just said this, but if you didn't get your question answered or you would like to access a recording of this webinar, you can access those in My Active Health, and that will be available in the next week. So thank you all again for joining, and I know we're coming up on Thanksgiving, so happy early holidays to everyone, and have a great day.